What's up, YouTube? It's the Action Figure Grader coming back to you with another subscriber Q&A video. I had some questions that I didn't get to from the last giveaway I did, so I thought we would do another Q&A video. If you have other questions, please leave a like on this video and leave a question in the comment below, and we'll do another one. It all depends on you guys providing some good questions like some of the ones I'm going through today. So let's dig into some awesome questions. The first one is Hello Master 07. He says, what's my favorite bounty hunter? Mine is Boba Fett. I would say most people's favorite is Boba Fett, and I waffle more than a fat man at a Waffle House. I don't know. I like Boba Fett, but I certainly like Bosk. I have a pretty good run of both going with my Boba Fett action figures. It's really just loose graded, just given how expensive mint on cards are. But Bosk, I've got bootlegs, I've got loose graded, I've got a really nice run of vintage mint on card going, and I lean towards Bosk because I just like the fact that he's an alien. I tend to skew more towards aliens with some of my action figures in my collection, and he gurgles a lot. He doesn't really speak, and he's got kind of a cool backstory in a lot of the 1990s comics, like or not comics, but the books, like the Bounty Hunter Guild trilogy. And I just like Bosk. I like the way he looks, and a lot of the variations, there's so much variation with like the fat lips and the toxic limbs and all that kind of stuff. So I lean towards Bosk right now, and you can ask me probably a week from now and I'll say Boba Fett again. But that's a good question. Mr. X asked a question that I've gotten a ton in private messages, so I'm going to go through it right now. He says, the listings with the best offer that's accepted, how do you know the actual sales price? And he's referring to kind of my market updates where I say it was a best offer that was accepted, and then I name the price. I can't find the option to see the actual accepted offer. Again, this is a question I've gotten a ton, so I want to give a shout out to Barry S., who's a Patreon supporter. He showed me how to do this. And so we're going to do an example right now. And so I found this one that just sold today, and that's a Star Wars double telescoping saber Ben Kenobi. This one had no grade because the inner filament on the saber was gone. It was listed for $3,799. So what you do is you copy the title of the auction, and then you go to 130point.com. So this is kind of the main website. Again, it's 130point.com. So this is their main screen, and then in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see it says Search eBay Sales. So you click on that, and then scroll down to this search bar, and then just paste in what you just copied for whatever auction you're trying, or whatever item you're trying to find the actual sales price for. And then you hit submit, and then sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but usually it works. And in this case, it did work just fine. So that double telescoping bin with no grade, the list price was $3,799. The best offer that was accepted was $3,000. And it usually works. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes they're doing maintenance. Sometimes the international sales don't work. But I found that most of the time, 130point.com works just fine. And that's the website I use. And again, thank you to Barry S. for showing me how to do that. And that is what I recommend for any of you looking for, trying to look up what the actual sales price was. Next up, the 40-year-old gamer asks, what should I use to clean loose figures that have cigarette smoke or are just dirty without damaging them? So if you have loose figures, the only thing I recommend for cleaning, for cleaning them is soap and water. That's it. Anything else will probably deteriorate the actual paint. And even soap and water can damage really fragile paint, like on PvP figures, Spanish PvP figures, or POC figures where the paint applications are really poor anyway. You'll often see on those Spanish figures some bubbling on the limbs because that paint that they use is just not very good. But if you have a standard Kenner figure like from Hong Kong, the paint on those is pretty solid. And I've gotten loose figures before, and if I've noticed kind of flecks of dirt or whatever, I just use either a Q-tip or a toothbrush and very lightly, dip it in soap and water and then very lightly brush it. Don't do it too hard because it can affect the paint, and then just wash it off and then let it dry. Again, don't soak it like, fully submerged. Just use light water with a toothbrush or a Q-tip. And that's really the only thing I've found. Now, will I get rid of smoke? I don't know the answer to that. I've never had any figures that have had heavy cigarette smoke smell to them, but I think that's really your best and only option without using it. Some people have mentioned Gugon. I've never tried using that. I know that all the grading companies, I'm assuming that if this was just a figure that you're going to send off to be graded, they do put all of those figures under blacklight to check for paint touch-up or any kind of other kind of touch-ups or chemicals. So I would, me personally, if I'm sending it off to be graded, I wouldn't use any chemicals or Gugon or anything like that. But if it's just a loose figure you're going to display, you can use whatever you want to. Just be aware that there is potential for damage if you use anything other than soap and water with a Q-tip or a toothbrush. But that's a good question. Darcy, he asks, how many vintage Star Wars figures do you have in your collection? Total, mox, loose, graded. Thanks for keep doing the great videos. I don't know the answer, Darcy. I counted a few, probably a year and a half or 2 years ago, and it was like close to 1,000. And I've certainly got more that's coming back. I think I've got like 30 that are coming back from Collector Archive Services soon. I've got another 16 or so at AFA. So I'm always getting new stuff in, but I'm also selling stuff occasionally, and I don't sell a lot, but I do sell some things occasionally to either fund another purchase, or like lately I've kind of just been downsizing to kind of get rid of space constraint issues at my house and in my collection room. But a rough number is probably about 1,000, somewhere in that ballpark between loose graded and mint on card. I don't really have much in the way of loose other than what you see above me here, some vehicles that hang from the ceiling, like some 10-year-old kid in his bedroom. But really most if not all of my collection is graded, and I would say that that's a rough number, but it could be a little high, could be a little low. I've sold off some things here this year just to kind of make room for stuff. Next up, Spiderfire04 says, when will they release Star Wars Rebels characters in the Star Wars Vintage Collection, and will the Rebels figures from the cartoon show increase in value? On the second half of that question, he's referring to the Rebels cartoon line of figures. And, the market is a little weird right now. There's just a little bit of hesitation, I think, because there's so much new content coming out, that, you might see some slight price changes here and there. But I think, me personally, I think that the way that the items spiking in value right after a new show or right after a new show is announced, whether it's comic books or action figures, I think that might be dead, just because there's so much new content coming out on an annual basis. Where we used to get one Star Wars movie or show a year, now we're getting 3, 4, 5, and I just think that there's a little bit of FOMO fatigue, where people are just not going to go out and start grabbing everything. Now, that being said, if you look at like the Clone Wars figures that we've covered in price videos, and some of these other older non-vintage collection lines, non-vintage Kenner lines, they have been creeping up in value slowly, as maybe the kids who are using those or enjoying those as kids are starting to age out, and starting to have careers and things like that, and disposable income to kind of backfill their childhood toys. So a lot of the stuff from the early 2000s, those guys are now, 18 to 25 years old, and I think that you're going to see more and more of that, as we get into the later 2020s. Those kids that were buying, that were playing with toys, let's call it, 2000 to 2005, a lot of those items are probably going to start seeing a price increase as those collectors want to collect what they had in their childhood collection. On the first part, I do think that we will see the Rebels characters in the vintage collection line, probably when Ahsoka drops. They already confirmed Ezra Bridger has been cast, and he looks like a perfect fit, at least from his face and everything. It looks just like Ezra Bridger would look. It's kind of an actor I'd never heard of before. I'm sure Eris Syndulla is coming. We also know that Sabine Wren has been cast. So it's just a matter of time that the vintage collection is going to see the Rebels characters, and it'll probably be Ahsoka card art. The Ahsoka logo will be on there. So I think you can expect to see that. And as a side note, as it relates to Disney Plus content, how awesome has Andor been so far? I watched the first 3 episodes, and I said several months ago, at least 6 months ago, that I was most hopeful for Andor as a TV show to be better than the rest of the stuff. The Book of Boba Fett was obviously mediocre. I think Obi-Wan was above mediocre, but still not great, still not nearly on Mandalorian level. I think Andor has vaulted itself through its character development and its snappy dialogue. Obviously, the first 2 episodes were slow, but the character development is so good in that show, and the dialogue is just second to none. So I'm very hopeful for the rest of that series, and apparently it's going to go on for at least another 2 seasons or so. So I think that Andor has really proven itself so far to be gritty, dark, and kind of what Star Wars fans have been wanting. So if you haven't checked it out yet, I highly encourage it. Now that you have Grievous, what other figures are you looking for? And he's, of course, talking about the awesome foil and retail release versions of General Grievous in the Vintage Collection that I kindly received from Chet O and Mike C, 2 Patreon supporters. It was just a really generous couple of gifts that those guys sent me. What am I looking for in the Vintage Collection now? Nothing right now. I've got too many already. I've got, probably 25 or so Vintage Collection collector grade Big Bad Toy Store in my closet. So I don't really want anything else, but I think if I was going to get something, it'd probably be the Rogue One Imperial Tank Driver or Commander, one of those. Maybe, Commander Gree from TVC 1.0, but I'm really not spending much right now, if at all. And I don't know if that's going to change anytime soon. I'm just a little bit wary about spending any kind of big boy money for a while. FNU LNU, who has been a long-time channel supporter, being that you're the Nostradamus of little plastic figures, when will we see Count Dooku in the TVC? And I think it's just a matter of time, right? I mean, obviously the Black Series figure came out, and you saw that on the front of the thumbnail for this video. So usually when it appears in the Black Series, at some point later in time, we see it in the Vintage Collection. So I think the lightness was great for Dooku in that Black Series figure. And I'm sure at some point soon, probably next year or maybe the year after, we will see a Vintage Collection version of Dooku. And this is something that Obi-Wan, Only One Kenobi, and John Miko and Boss Bounty have covered at length, so you can go check them out on their channels. But I think he's going to be coming, and he looks awesome. And I think that it'll do a really good job if it at all scales nicely down to that 3 3/4 inch scale versus the 6-inch Black Series figure, which was pretty fantastic. Ramona Flower says, would you rather fly an X-Wing or a TIE Fighter? I'm going with the X-Wing, not the TIE Fighter, the X-Wing. Now, if it's a TIE Defender, then that's a different story. The reason I would not choose the TIE Fighter is because they don't have deflector shields and they have no hyperdrive. The X-Wing has deflector shields and it has a hyperdrive. The TIE Defender that you see so championed by Grand Admiral Thrawn in a lot of Timothy Zahn's novels does have the hyperdrive and deflector shields. And I think if I was going to choose one between the X-Wing and the TIE Defender, I'd take the TIE Defender. It's much more maneuverable and fast. And, it has all the advantages of the X-Wing, plus it's more maneuverable. So, nerd alert, that's the end of that question. Michael Berry says, love the channel. Any chance since you've made a few videos on PSA cards, you start collecting, maybe you'll get the entire original set graded? There's no chance that I will get the entire original set of 1977 top Star Wars trading cards graded. That's an expensive proposition, even in lower grade. But I do think that PSA cards are probably where I'll probably buy a few here, this fall, because I'm not trying to spend much money. And the PSA trading card market has taken a dip recently, kind of along with comics. And it's really amazing how much the price drops from a PSA 10 in some of these vintage cards just going to a PSA 9. A PSA 9 is a mint card, right? It's not gem mint, which is, a PSA 10, but the price difference is like a third or less for some of those cards. Obviously, there are exceptions to that rule, like the rookie Luke in his Stormtrooper outfit, things like that. But I think that I probably will get a few cards, but it's just going to be kind of character focused, maybe like Darth Vader or Luke or Boba Fett, things like that. And along that same line, I got another question or two on that. Out of all the Star Wars trading card, and this is from Rick Consort, out of all the Star Wars trading card sets out there, which interests you the most? Ones you'd like to add to your collection? Thanks for making your videos. I really appreciated the trading card video you did the other day. And thank you for the feedback on that. It seems like a lot of you did like that PSA kind of market update. And I'll probably do another one here soon, and I'll include like SGC graded items or BGS, Beckett Grading Services items. and try to do that. I won't do it every week, but I'll probably do it every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, just to kind of appease the masses out there that do collect these graded trading cards. The trading card market, there's so many different lines to collect for Star Wars that you have to limit yourself. Or at least that's how I feel about for me. If I'm going to collect anything, I'm going to kind of stay focused and not kind of be all over the place like I am with the rest of my Star Wars collection. So I certainly would want to get some vintage cards from the 1977, 1980, and 1983 run, but I'm not going to be going for full lines. I mean, that's just ridiculous. I don't have the space for that. But I will kind of pick and choose nice cards. I'll probably, for the most part, will stick to PSA 9s and 10s. I'll probably go down to an 8 for a card that's very expensive, like the Air Goldenrod C-3PO card. That's pretty pricey in a PSA 9. I wouldn't spend that kind of money. But in a PSA 8, it's like $300 to $400, which is still a lot of money and more than I'm willing to spend right now. But with some financial diligence and maybe selling a few items, I could certainly afford that card. But the vintage line, I think, interests me a lot. The living set, if I wanted to go budget friendly, the living set from 2020 and 2021 has that kind of vintage feel to it. It's very kind of a retro card. They present really nicely and they fit nicely with vintage cards, but they're very affordable. Not all of them are. There's certainly exceptions like Boba Fett and Ahsoka, Darth Vader. Some of those are very, very pricey, even though they're only a couple of years old. But I just picked up a Clone Wars version of Bo-Katan PSA 10 Star Wars living set, and it was, I think, with tax and shipping and everything, it was $39. And PSA charges about $30 to grade the card. So to get that shipped with taxes and everything for $39 in a PSA 10, and it's Bo-Katan from the Clone Wars, so it's kind of the animated style. I thought that was a great deal. I'll pay that. I looked at kind of recent sales for that card, and it was as high as like $65. I got it in an auction last night for $39 or whatever it was, and that kind of thing. I think I'd probably lean towards in the short term if I'm not feeling like spending money. There's some other lines out there I like, but those are probably the two that capture my attention the most. But we'll see. And again, I'm not going to be spending a lot of money on them, but it's just something that kind of tied me over while I take a break from action figures in kind of the dicey economic environment that we're in right now. And I wanted to show some examples of some of those living set sales. I just pulled up PSA 10 Star Wars living set just to show you some examples of sales prices. And especially with the sequel trilogy cards, you can get them from really cheap. I mean, here was a Sith Jet Trooper PSA 10 for $48. Mon Mothma sold for $47.88. Even Boba Fett from the Book of Boba Fett, that sold for $54. Mace Windu sold for $51. Yoda, which, there's a lot of them on the census. I mean, these cards are fairly new, and they are delivered from Topps raw in nice cases. So they, in general, stay very, very clean, and most of them grade out at like a 9 or a 10 because they're delivered ungraded from Topps for, in cases that keep them from getting damaged. But there's plenty of very reasonably priced options. You have the client from The Mandalorian Season 1. That one was $26. I mean, that's less than grading cost if you were going to get it graded yourself. Here's one. This is not the one I bought, but this is about what, this might be the one I bought. I can't remember. But this is the Bo-Katan. It's $31 plus $5 shipping plus taxes. That's about what I paid for mine. But there are more expensive ones out there. And when you go down to PSA 9, you're going to get it for like 10 or $20 for some of these figures. So anyway, or some of these cards. So, it's a nice affordable option for those of you looking to not spend too much money, but would like to collect something Star Wars related. Josh says, if you jump down the graded card rabbit hole, what would be your Grail card? That's a pretty easy one for me. It would be the rookie card for Boba Fett. And here it is. It says Starfile Official Business. We just covered this one in a recent market update on PSA Trading Cards. I think that this and a PSA 9 would be kind of my personal Grail. They usually go for $350 to $450, and that's about kind of my max right now on anything I'd buy. And it's a great card. It has a very 70s vibe to it. Starfile Official Business. So that would be probably the one I'd want. If I'm going to spend big money on one, that'd probably be the one I'd get. But again, it's probably not going to happen anytime soon, if ever. But that's probably the card I'd choose. All right, Chris Jenkins, he has a kind of a long question here, but I wanted to go through it. My question is, given that you regularly talk about blisters and figures yellowing over time, and that we should be buying the figure and not the grade that has been assigned to it when looking at eBay items, and also given the high cost of grading, would you still recommend getting a figure graded as a long-term investment, or would it be better to just buy a high-quality UV protective acrylic case and not get it graded? I personally don't collect figures just as an investment reason myself, but I would be interested in your views. So I think this is a good question. And basically what it's referring to is like this. If you, let's say you have a Greedo on a Return of the Jedi card that's yellowed very heavily, as most US Kenner Return of the Jedi card backs do. They have like a fire retardant chemical that's in that blister. And as a result, they don't age well. Most of them do yellow over time, especially 65 backs and later. 65 backs, 77 backs, 79 backs, 92 backs with the Power of the Force line. They tend to yellow really heavily like this. And I've got one just like this in my collection. And he's asking, do I really need to get it graded? No, you don't. And grading's not for everyone. I've said that on my channel since the beginning of my channel, that, you know, grading is not for everyone. You don't need to get anything graded if you don't want to. It's certainly an expensive hobby to get stuff graded. It's not cheap. It's $60 thereabouts, plus shipping to and back from the grading company. So it's very, very expensive to get a mint on card figure graded. And an acrylic case will do just fine. You know, a UV acrylic case costs $20 plus shipping probably, and that will protect it from further degradation. So, you know, again, it all comes down to what you are looking for in your collection, how much money you have, how much discretionary income you have, whether you like to have items graded. Not everybody likes graded Star Wars stuff, and I get that. And I certainly am not saying that I'm certainly not saying that everyone should be grading everything, okay? You know, I've recognized that, you know, that's not for everyone. So, yes, sliding acrylic cases are just fine for them. It's easier to resell graded items, I've found, and they do tend to command a premium. And, you know, anytime I need to sell something to free up some quick cash, it's never an issue. You know, the stuff tends to sell very, very quickly when I price it correctly, and I list it on Rogue 5 Toys, for example. So, you know, in general, if I price it right, it sells quickly, and it's because it's graded and authenticated, and people know exactly what they're getting and what. And you know, it's not like I have any ink touch-ups or anything or cracked the blisters, blah, blah, blah. So again, it all comes down to what you're looking for, but a sliding acrylic case from like GW Acrylics or somebody like that will provide you the necessary UV protection for your mint on card Star Wars item. Kevin L says, I have the foil Grievous too, and it's one of my favorites. My question is, what's your favorite Star Wars comic cover? And this is a good question, Kevin, and thank you for the long-time channel support. You've been a great subscriber. My favorite comic book cover in my collection is different than my favorite comic book cover of all time. You know, I think that Star Wars #1 is probably a timeless classic. Star Wars #42, the first appearance of Boba Fett with Dengar and Boss and Boba Fett on the cover. That's one that I'd love to have if I ever decide to start spending that kind of money again. I bid on a couple this year and just lost out. I finished second on one on a CGC 9.8. I'm not going to be buying that anytime soon, though. I can tell you that, just given what the economy's done. But my favorite in my collection is this one, Heir to the Empire #1 in a CGC 9.8. This is the first appearance of Grand Admiral Thrawn, Jorah C'baoth, and Mara Jade. And I just love this cover. I love the book from, you know, Heir to the Empire, and to me this is kind of a timeless classic. I don't care what the prices do. I bought it when I bought it, and I'm very happy with the price I bought it. And you know, it's just an absolutely gorgeous cover and easily my favorite cover. It's also the most expensive comic, I think, in my entire collection. So that one's my grail, my personal grail. But you know, it all depends on what the question is whether it's a one that I've already got or one that I'd like to have. And certainly Star Wars 42 is probably the top of my list if I ever start spending that kind of money again. Dennis Z asked another good question that I wanted to talk about. He says, what's with Newton rings being acceptable from CGC? Do any of your 9.8s have Newton rings? And the answer is yes. Newton rings, and for those of you who don't know what those look like, these are what Newton rings look like. I pulled this from the boards on CGC Comics. And CGC had a run there this year and last year where straight from CGC, after they were graded, they would sometimes get Newton rings. I never had any that were nearly this bad, like you see circled in red here. But basically what it is there's an inner liner that holds the comic in place. And sometimes the CGC encapsulators do not use the right thickness for the outer shell for the inner liner. And what happens is that inner liner butts up against the outer acrylic shell. And because of how it sunlight reflects on it, because those two different plastics are touching up against each other, essentially you're going to start seeing these weird rings, and it kind of looks like an oil spill. Up here, it kind of looks like an oil spill right here. And for a while there, for some of my books, I did get some Newton rings, and they're very, very annoying. But the last 2 or 3 batches I've had no issues with Newton rings. Since CGC has really improved quality control, probably as a result of being acquired by Blackstone and them implementing better quality control measures, every single book I received back in that Mandalorian pre-screen, and I sent in 33, and 17 of them came back in a CGC 9.8. Every single case was flawless without any Newton rings or scuffs or cracks to the cases, anything like that. So yes, it does happen, and yes, you need to be very careful when you're looking at items on eBay at auction or in a buy it now situation. And I've had times where I've said, hey, does this have any Newton rings on the book? And if I don't get a response from them, I'm not buying the book. Move along, find a different book to buy. And that's kind of been my approach for any CGC comic on eBay that I can't tell, because it's very easy for eBay sellers to kind of tilt the angles right and make it look like it doesn't have any Newton rings. And I have some books that I bought on eBay that look perfectly flawless in the photos, and then you get it and it's got Newton rings on it. So it's really annoying, but it's becoming less and less of a problem. So if it's a recently graded book, I'd say within the last 3 or 4 or 5 months, it's probably going to be fine. But when in doubt, always ask the eBay seller whether it's got Newton rings or not, and if it does, and he didn't disclose it, or if he says it doesn't have any Newton rings. And I've also had cases where I've gotten a book that had Newton rings, and then I kind of look at it and kind of move it around just a little bit, and the Newton rings go away. So it's a really annoying thing, but it's becoming less of a problem with recently graded books. It's just with some of the older graded books that you got to be more careful about. But that's a really good question. Anyway, that's all I really had for this video. I know it was a long one. Be sure to leave some more questions in the comments below, and we'll do another one in a week's time. Thanks again for watching, and I'll be back soon.